Hi, it's Bumble. Welcome back to my channel. So, I'm going to at least, not for this video, but in general, going to be talking about the first two Terminator movies. It's funny, I keep starting and bouncing between, or not really even bouncing between, but like, keep starting all these franchises and stuff. First it was like Jurassic Park, and then Guardians, and then Terminator, because my folks keep wanting to watch all of these and then not really wanting to watch the other ones, or being like, yeah, we'll get to them eventually. So it's kind of going all over the place, where I'm gonna watch one of the other Guardians movies and I'm gonna be watching Jurassic Park with my mom, but then both my parents want to keep watching Terminator. And it's just kind of a lot of series to like, I have to keep starting and keeping track of in my head for these videos. So if I end up getting things mixed around, you know. But anyway, in terms of the Terminator movies, I've only seen the first two, and I've seen like a teeny bit of Genesis, and that's pretty much it. I mean, I don't know how the other sequels are, because I only ever hear people talk about the first two Terminator movies. I know that Dark Fate, which is like the newest one from like 2019, is supposed to be pretty bad, and I read the plot of it and I'm like, yeah, I'm not interested, so I know I'm not gonna watch that one. Genesis I want to try to find and watch, even though that's the one that like resets the timeline, but literally only because I remember being at my grandma's house, not the grandma I watched Jurassic Park at, but my other grandma, and I remember Genesis was on, but like the end of it or something, and Matt Smith was like this hologram. I think Matt Smith was playing like Skynet or something, and I remember I didn't watch like Doctor Who at the time or anything. I remember being confused. I'm like, what is the plot of this movie or whatever? But I remembered about that. And now that I've seen Doctor Who and I'm like trying to watch all the stuff Matt Smith did, not like now, but like in general, you know? And I've always been curious about that. So I might literally just watch Genesis for him. The third Terminator, because then there's Rise of the Machines and there's Salvation. Rise of the Machine I'm not really interested in. Not really interested in Salvation either. I've heard that one's just more of like a war movie, because it's like John Connor actually leading the resistance. And there's like this big gap between like Terminator 2 and Terminator 3. And usually when that happens with movies, it means usually like the sequels are kind of worse. I have a feeling there's probably a reason people only ever talk and quote about the first two Terminator movies. But the second one I have seen, it's pretty good. I'm gonna actually be watching that tomorrow. But anyway, let's talk about Terminator 1984. This is my second time seeing it, actually, and you know what, I enjoyed it like just as much as the first time. Like back when I originally watched it, I watched it with some friends. I'd never seen any of the Terminator movies before, and it was pretty good. And I remember being so like focused on what was happening with the plot, and it's kind of nice, especially because this is like it's a time travel series, but this is also like a time travel movie, so it's kind of nice when you already know what's gonna happen. And I think because it's very like, it's an action movie, but from what I remember, I feel like the others are they get even more crazy and stuff. But there's so much like lore you have to like immediately learn with this one as it's like being introduced. And I remember I was like trying to follow along with that the first time I watched, but also all the stuff that like Kyle and Sarah are doing of trying to stay alive from the Terminator and stuff. And then this time, because like I already knew it was gonna happen, you know, I feel like I could really focus more on like the lore, because since I'll be at least watching like 2 or 3 of these movies, you know, I'm like trying to remember everything, and there was definitely lore stuff that I forgot about. I remember that Kyle dies in this, but I didn't remember that like even when he gets sent back to the past, him and the Terminator that also goes back into the past, they can't go like back to the future or anything. They're just stuck in like 1984, which is kind of a bummer, because like if he'd just been able to survive, you know, that Terminator, I mean, he like blew himself up on purpose and stuff. I think he probably knew he was gonna die. You know, he could have like helped out Sarah at the beginning, but it also is like this weird paradox thing, or I don't know if it's really a paradox, where like he goes back in time and he like has this photo of Sarah and he's like been in love with her his entire life or whatever, and he goes back in time to try to save her, and then they end up having sex, which makes him like John Connor's dad, but then he's also, Kyle's like grown up in the future or something where he like knows John Connor. Of course John Connor would have to be older than him, so it just ends up being really weird. And it's interesting to think about, like, going forward with the other movies where, of course, like, Sarah at that point would know, like, who her baby's father is, but I sometimes think, like, does the baby, like, did she ever tell, or I'm assuming she would have had to tell John, and that's how he kind of starts it off, of like giving Kyle the picture. And it's kind of nice, you get to see the photo of Sarah and like how it actually happens at the end, and you can even tell with like the clothing changes and stuff. She spends most of this movie, because of course she doesn't know anything about the oncoming apocalypse or all of this stuff about like, yeah, the machines are going to take over. She doesn't take it seriously at first, neither does like anyone else at that point in time. But then you already see, I'm assuming it's like a couple months later, because she already has like a visible baby bump at the end, where she's already kind of changed her outfit. She doesn't really dress as like girly. She's like ditched the like super 80s poofy hair and stuff, and she's got the Jeep and she's got the German Shepherd, and she's ready to go to start prepping for the apocalypse. And I'm glad I'm going to be watching the second one tomorrow, because I didn't remember everything from that, but I was like wondering about things of how these continue, where it sounded like the time machine that Kyle and the Terminator in this movie use is like destroyed or something. He makes this big deal of like, yeah, no one can go back and no one can, continue to go to the future, but then there's the like reprogrammed Terminator. I think I saw in the Netflix blurb that it gets reprogrammed in like the present. So I'm wondering if it's like the one that got destroyed originally, or like where the heck does it come from? Because like obviously these movies continue and there's like more Terminators that like keep getting back sent in time and whatever, and I'm like, how does this keep happening if like the time machines destroyed and stuff? And then I was also wondering about Sarah, and I'm saying these kind of like not literally trying to ask these questions. I know they'll be answered in the next movie, but it's just something I was thinking about, has to do with this viewing and everything. Where like Sarah's pregnant at the end of this movie, and she's like visibly pregnant, and she like drives off somewhere in like Mexico. But I remember in the next movie, like John's like 10 or something, Sarah's in like jail, I think, where she ends up being like super buff. She's been training to be able to defend herself and stuff, and she's like a badass at that point. But then John has like adoptive parents, so I don't know. I'm assuming it's going to be one of those things where it's like, because it's been a hot minute since I've seen the second movie, where it's going to be like no one believes you of your story. And I mean, that makes sense, because like a portion of the movie is spent at a police station where the police are like interrogating Kyle, and even Sarah at that point still kind of thinks that he's crazy. And then the police, it's funny, they mention of like, oh yeah, we have like 30 cops here, you're gonna be safe from whoever's trying to get you. And then the Terminator just like mows them all down, and my parents were shouting at the screen of like, why don't they get the body armor? Because they make this, I was actually surprised about that, they make this big deal at one point about body armor, not to use it to protect yourself, but more of like, they're trying to debunk Sarah's theories about the Terminator and try to convince her it's just some guy and not like a murder machine or whatever. And I assumed like, once I saw that the cops kept dying and they didn't have the body armor, that like Sarah would grab the body armor or something, she'd at least have like a bulletproof vest, but none of the characters ever end up using it, which is a little annoying. Especially because Reese ends up getting shot at one point and Sarah has to like help him. I do actually like how their dynamic progresses throughout the movie, where he's so focused on like keeping her safe at first, where he keeps like shouting at her and she's freaked out, because from her perspective it's like, she's living this life, her life, this guy's like following her around, and then he's suddenly yelling at her all these instructions and whatever. But it's nice that like she gets to ask him about the future, and that's how we learn. I feel like the amount of information we learn about the future, especially because this is the first movie where it's not, you know, like they know there's going to be more in the series, obviously. It's like we're given just enough info to like kind of understand what's going on in this like future. I keep wanting to say future timeline, but it's like the same timeline, at least for now. But it's not so much where it takes like the mystery behind it. I do like that we get to see it as like these sort of flash forwards, almost kind of little chunks throughout the movie. I thought that was pretty cool. We see like how shitty the future is and stuff. I'm actually glad that we don't get to actually see what John Connor looks like. And then he gets like established later, especially because I feel like that could have given away the thing of like, you know, Kyle turning out to be like Connor's dad. I like the way how it's set up where it's said of like, oh, John didn't talk about his father or whatever, and he just, you know, gave Kyle the picture, and it's, you know, to set the events in motion that he'll fall in love with her and go back to the future to protect her. I mean, to the past, and to make John or whatever. And you hear Sarah say in her tapes at the end of like, I could sort of tell you about your father, but will it affect your decision to send him back to the future? That's gotta be tough if like you knew who your dad was and you had to send him back to save your mom, but like knowing he'd be like killed and stuff. It's just kind of funny when they do eventually have their like sex scene or whatever where they're talking about relationships, and then he mentions the thing of like how he's like always been in love with her, and she like wants him kind of bad at that point where she almost seems disappointed of like, oh, you don't have a special someone. It was kind of funny watching that though, where I'm thinking like, well, yeah, he's like fighting in this war and is like trying to survive in like the apocalypse. I don't think hooking up with people is like the number one interest at that point, Sarah. But yeah, it's crazy they only know each other for the whole movie takes place in like a couple of hours, just like at night or something, and then it's over, you know. What was the other thing I was gonna say? It was about Kyle. Hold on, let me pause. It was something important. Okay, it wasn't important, but I remembered like how Sarah doesn't want to know who the father is, kind of also helps to like set up the mystery, because like eventually, like in a couple of months, she'll figure it out. There's a part I didn't really think about it the first time I watched the movie. It's like before Kyle confesses his feelings or whatever, there's a part where they're in like an underpass and Sarah falls asleep, and we see the flash forward or whatever where she's like having the dream about the dogs, but it's really just like of the future. I mean, I don't think she's like literally dreaming about the future, but she's like dreaming about dogs. And I just remembered when she wakes up, she's in his lap and he's kind of like stroking her face a little, and I think the first time I watched it I thought, oh, that's like kind of weird, and now I'm realizing like, you know, once you've already seen it and you know that he's like cared about her the whole time. And it does seem like they're sort of like bonding once they get to the hotel, and then they have to like make all the dynamite and leave. I think the one thing with this movie, and I get why it has to be like the way it is it takes like 40 minutes until Sarah finally meets Kyle and they're like properly being hunted down by the Terminator, and then the movie really starts to pick up, because the first 40 minutes it's like they're both like arriving in the past. I do really like that shot. I'm assuming it's probably iconic when the Terminator first shows up in the past and it's just like his silhouette and he's in that like pose where he's nude or whatever, and he has to wear this jacket, and it kept throwing me off because I'm like, this isn't his outfit, you know, because it's such like an iconic costume of like the sunglasses and the leather jacket. But it takes him a while to get that, and then it's kind of slow where it's like him and Kyle and they're both trying to find clothes and weapons and trying to find Sarah. But I like that you don't know with either of them, or I mean, I guess you can tell with the Terminator immediately. He literally like kills someone as soon as he gets to the past. but you don't really know what either of them want with Sarah. It's just they're trying to find them, so you almost don't know like who's good, who's evil, which one of them is like a robot. Because I don't think they actually like show it for a while, where you get to see the Terminator's POV with like the red screen. And I mean, eventually Kyle does say this thing about like, oh, he's not a man, he's a machine. Like they established that early on, but I like how it kind of takes a while, where, you know, he just seems like he's a really strong guy because he's played by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's a pretty strong guy, and he does a good job as the Terminator. I'm so used to him in movies in the 80s where he's usually like the good guy or the action hero, where I'm thinking about like the movie Twins with Danny DeVito. I'm not used to there's probably more from the 80s where he's like the villain. It's weird to think about because then he plays a different Terminator in the next movie, but he's like the reprogrammed one where he's suddenly like on the good guy team, you know? Like, I haven't really seen the other Terminator movies, so I don't know if this is the only one where it's Arnold specifically playing like a bad Terminator, like an evil one, you know? Like I said, I'm probably not gonna watch all the sequels. I don't really care. I'm just gonna go probably straight from like 2 to Genesis. But yeah, he does a good job. And I like the concept where they're describing how he's like, I didn't actually realize this entire time he was a cyborg. I just assumed he was completely a robot, because I remembered, you know, there's that really cool shot where the Terminator comes out of the flames and he's all metal and stuff, which I want to talk about when I kind of get to that point. But how everything, like his outside self is like biologically grown. And they mentioned about like, oh, the bad breath, the sweat to like mimic with humans and stuff. And I thought, but wouldn't his behavior give him away? But like, no, it takes a while for like Kyle to realize, oh, that's the Terminator, like until he like actually attacks Sarah. I like how there's that flashback where it shows another Terminator that looks completely human, who actually gets let into the human settlement or whatever, and then immediately tries to shoot everybody. And it's described as like the Terminators are the most dangerous of the machines. And I feel like I didn't really get it until that point of like, yeah, if something looks and passes as human, you know, you would make that mistake. You wouldn't be able to tell that it was a machine, and then it could like sneak in and kill you. That's like the whole point of them being infiltrators. Because I kept thinking about that tank thing from the beginning that has the laser, and I thought like that's gotta be more like effective or whatever. But no, I feel like I finally get it now of like, you know, if they look human, they'd be harder to spot. Not everything in this movie has like aged well either. I mean, this movie is like so 80s, it's not even funny, between like the hair and stuff. I think especially the stuff with Sarah's roommate Ginger, it was kind of nice, you know, to see, and I get it because it's like the first movie too, where, you know, she's just a normal girl and then she gets wrapped up in all this stuff of like Sarah's life before all the Terminator stuff, where she like lives with her roommate and has an iguana and goes out partying and works as a waitress and stuff. I actually like that we get to see a little bit of like her and Sarah and Ginger interacting. I like that part when they're both in the bathroom getting ready for like their dates and stuff, with Ginger's like super poofy 80s hair. I thought Sarah's iguana looked kind of cool. I don't remember if the iguana gets killed, but I know the roommate does. I felt kind of bad for her. That always kind of seems to happen in this movie, where there's in these movies where it's like the main character's friend or just someone who isn't even involved with the plot ends up having to get killed just so there's like more deaths on screen or whatever. But her friend's constantly blasting music and stuff. My mom kept commenting about the character's like hair and clothing and how 80s everything seemed, because she was telling me about how when the movie came out she was like in her early 20s, I think. And all the actors are like so young too. I forgot about that. Like, I only really know Linda Hamilton from the Terminator movies, and the guy that plays Kyle, I think, is Corporal Hicks in Aliens 2, or I think it's just called Aliens if I remember right, because Aliens was also kind of on my mind because that was a series I got into this year for the first time of like watching, and I've talked about it on this channel before. So that's cool. He got to be in like two of the biggest like 80s franchises and stuff. If anything, I just kind of kept thinking about Alien as I was watching this movie, because at least it's kind of similar to the first one, where it's like the main character, you know, you get to see what her life is like before all the crazy stuff that happens in the sequels, where she's like an action survivor, you know, like Sarah and Ripley, where it's kind of, I mean, the first Alien movie is pretty much just like a horror movie where, you know, the alien is being introduced to the audience and the characters for the first time, so the whole goal is really just kind of trying to survive and everything. And it's like that here too, where like we don't know what's up with the Terminators or anything, and they're having to fight it with like 1980s technology, and then as the sequels go on, things get like more and more dangerous and stuff. But speaking of aliens, the guy that plays Bishop is in this movie. I completely forgot about that, because like the last time I watched this, I hadn't seen a single Alien movie. And it's kind of funny to me, because like sometimes the first time I see an actor play a character will be roles where they like play a robot or something, and then it'll throw me off when I'll see them in other stuff, and I'm like, oh, right, you're not, like, actually a robot or whatever. But it didn't feel that way with this movie, where I'm used to that actor, I don't know what his name is, as, like, Bishop in Aliens, but, like, he, you know, talks the same. It's usually, like, the way characters talk. You know how, like, when actors will play robots, even if they look like completely human, but they'll talk in this sort of slow way where you know, like, oh yeah, they're supposed to be like playing a robot or something, but like he talks exactly the same as he does for this like snarky police officer as he does for Bishop in Aliens. It was actually kind of cool. I guess he just like sounds like that. What else? There's a lot of cool like car chases and stuff. I liked all the car scenes where the characters are constantly having to find new vehicles, and then the Terminator ends up in like a police car at some point, and the big one, you know, is when the Terminator is in that huge like 18-wheeler truck or whatever, and is literally chasing Sarah. She's right in front of it running, and I thought that is such an easy kill, but then the truck ends up blowing up, and then you get the scene of the Terminator where he comes out of the flames and is all metal. Like, you get a lot of the iconic like Terminator, not all of them, but some of them, of the iconic Terminator lines of like the "I'll be back" and stuff. And that one I kept mistaking was in the second movie, but that's the one with the "Hasta la vista, baby." But the "I'll be back" one has been on my mind for a while, because my dad always quotes that when he like leaves the room to go upstairs, to the point where he's gotten me doing it too, but I can't do a good like Arnold impression, so it just sounds really bad. But speaking of Arnold and the Terminator, there's some parts where he has, I don't know if it's like a mask or like an animatronic head, because there's a couple, or I think only like one or two, when you get to see his eye and he's like working on himself and you see the arm actually has metal in it. I'm like a bit squeamish towards like any scenes where like a character has to patch themselves up and there's blood, so I ended up turning away a bit. But it was kind of weird seeing like the metal, and then it was like kind of a bit bloody, but there wasn't like muscles inside or anything, and you'd see like blood come out into the sink or his eyeball or something. I always think that's kind of cool with like cyborg characters, when you can really see how organic but also metallic they are, if that makes sense, like how it's like blended and stuff. But when he has the robot eye, his face obviously looks very fake, and it was funny because those shots, I thought like, yeah, he really does look like a robot, because he's supposed to be a robot, like it's not Arnold in those. But I do like how they kind of revealed the eye where the camera is next to Arnold's face, and you can see him sticking stuff inside of where his other eye should be, but it's just like a side profile of him, so you don't actually see it. I thought that was like a cool way to like get around it and stuff. And then eventually, you know, like I was saying, he comes out of the fire and he's the Terminator, you know, it's like the full metal exoskeleton or whatever, which it's gonna forever throw me off seeing those, because I just permanently associate those with FNAF now. But it's kind of funny because I feel like he should look more scary because he doesn't look human anymore, and he looks, you know, he's got like the red eyes and the weird mouth. But if anything, he just comes off as super goofy. And I get it's like the 80s too. And I mean, it is impressive, like, and I was paying attention to it as it was happening, where like the Terminator is chasing the main characters, but because he's like fully the robot now, it's kind of looked like stop motion. And there's this one part where Sarah and Kyle are closing a door and trying to get away from the Terminator. I think it's when they end up inside the factory in the end, and I could like just sort of see it of like it's a green screen, because it looks, I feel like I can always tell because it'll look kind of fuzzy around the characters, and then it cuts to Terminator and it cuts back to them and they shut the door, and as soon as like the Terminator's not on screen anymore, then, you know, they're in front of an actual door and it's not the green screen. But it was kind of, you know, seamlessly put in there, as seamless as it can like get, basically. But yeah, the Terminator like stop motion is actually fine. It's just because of that, and I think because at that point, you know, once he stops looking like Arnold, the Terminator doesn't have any speaking lines anymore. And at that point, I kind of forget of like, oh yeah, it's supposed to be this like ruthless killer, because it's just this goofy metal skeleton looking thing that doesn't talk or anything, that's just chasing them. And it's not like it's like trying to shoot them or anything, because he doesn't have a gun anymore. He literally just walks towards them. I mean, he still absolutely has the ability to kill them and everything, where he almost chokes out Sarah, and he ends up like getting into a fight with Kyle and stuff, but he doesn't feel as threatening as like, you know, where Arnold's like a huge intimidating looking dude, like at the beginning where he like immediately kills those punks and takes their clothes and stuff. He just doesn't feel like threatening anymore when he's like completely made out of metal. It just becomes kind of funny, I think, especially because, you know, at that point it's like the end of the movie and then he's going to die. I did notice, and I hadn't noticed it last time, when they end up in the factory and Terminator is looking at the machines, and I was kind of wondering what he's like thinking about, because there's a part like that with Kyle earlier where he sees this like crane thing and it reminds him of like the Skynet weaponry and stuff, but the ones that the Terminator sees in the factory are just like these claws and things, and I thought that was kind of interesting. And then I like that it ends up getting killed by this hydraulic press thing that literally like squishes it to death until you see the eyeball, you know, the light goes out. And I was thinking about the whole thing of like the Terminators aren't supposed to feel like pain or anything, because I'm so used to like, you know, when a character dies on screen and they make some kind of noise, even if it's like a non-human character, it doesn't even have to be like a pain sound or anything, could just be like a metal crunch, or no, that would be like a non like on purpose sound the characters make. But like the Terminator itself, like from the inside, doesn't make a noise when it's squished to death. I feel like it just really reminds you of like how kind of inhuman it is. And then it dies and Sarah leaves, you know, to Mexico, knowing that like eventually the war will happen and having to get ready. So in that way, I'm like excited for the next movie and stuff. Something I was thinking about, and then I did have to Google after the credits, when they're talking about the backstory of Skynet and how it was like this war computer or whatever, and it decided like, oh, extinction for the human race in a millisecond, where it wasn't just targeting the other side, it was targeting everyone, and then decided to like kill everyone. Or it's mentioned at one point of like it panicked, and it was like Kyle's reasoning in the prison for something about like, why doesn't Skynet try to like kill John Connor in the future, even though it like wouldn't do anything at that point. It panicked, it was like hastily making these decisions. But especially the backstory part, I just mentioned about it being like a war machine deciding to kill everyone. I was thinking about Am from I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and I was thinking about like, man, in the 80s there's a lot of movies and things. I mean, I actually don't remember what year I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream was written. I thought it was the 60s, but I'm not completely sure on that at all. Don't like quote me on that. anyway, in the 80s, I guess with like computers on the rise, there's a lot of movies that are like the fear of technology taking over, or technology being magic, like in the movie Electric Dreams, of like computers, you know, being able to be sentient and whatever. But anyway, I was thinking about because of that. And then I got to the credits, and there's that one credit at the beginning that mentions about Harlan Ellison, who's the author of I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. And I'm like, okay, he's getting a credit. I gotta look into that. And I was reading it on Reddit about, I guess there's like these 2 stories he had written. I think they were adapted into a show or something. There's something about Outer Limits. I didn't know what it was. Where apparently he sued James Cameron, and then he was able to get like a credit on here. But anyway, I'm probably gonna go like into those stories. I mean, I know he's written like a ton of sci-fi stories, and I feel kind of bad. The only one that I know is I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, and I only found out about that within like the past like 3 years or so. I literally only know about that story because there was some video I watched where a YouTuber was talking about the video game and like making fun of it or something, and then I started to kind of notice it everywhere afterwards, with like, you know, finding out later on once the Amazing Digital Circus was like a thing, and that was like where the inspiration was coming from, and then in other stuff or whatever. But I might check out some of those other stories that like inspired, or you know, that apparently were being sued over for this movie. You get what I'm trying to say. But yeah, Terminator's pretty good. It feels different from like, actually I can't really say with the second movie because I'm gonna watch it tomorrow and I also don't remember it well. With this one, where it's like, you know, it takes place just in the 80s. There's no like future technology. It's literally just 2 people running away from a robot that doesn't look like a robot that's trying to kill them. It just kind of feels more like an 80s action movie. But I always like those kind of vibes. I notice especially with like the big action 80s movies where it's sort of like a cat and mouse thing of like 2 people that are just trying to like kill each other the whole time, and it gets like very tense, you know. And this movie has this like grittiness to it with the setting as well, where there's like clubs and punks and people in prison and sex and whatever, you know. I think also because it mostly takes place at night too, where the characters have to hide in like motel rooms and underpasses, you know, like it ain't pretty. But yeah, it's a good movie. I'm glad I got to rewatch it. At first I didn't really want to, but I thought, you know what, sure. Sometimes I don't want to watch movies. Like my folks or my friends will be like, hey, let's watch this movie, and it's like, oh, okay. But then sometimes I get myself into it. I like try to hype myself into it as like I can at least, you know, even if I didn't like the movie or not, I can at least like make a video on it. I'm not like that for like every movie, by the way. I usually do watch what I want or whatever. But it is kind of nice where afterwards I can just kind of like briefly talk about my thoughts on it, and sometimes that helps me kind of branch out into movies I wouldn't watch otherwise, you know, because I think, oh, hey, I can check it out and talk about it and stuff. But I still got more movies to see. But yeah, I'm gonna watch Terminator 2 tomorrow. I need to get back to like Jurassic Park at some point. I want to check out one of the Guardians movies, and then I'm gonna watch like Wicked on Friday, and then tomorrow I'm going to a relative's house. We're probably gonna watch more movies, and it's just like a lot of movies for me this week. All right, see you next time, where probably the day after this posted I'll have the Terminator 2 review. See you then.